According to those that have experienced it, cryosleep is closer to death than life. Perhaps then, it is only appropriate that a place in which 30,000 colonists slept was attached to the remains of something dead. Sheltered in the UESC Marathon's heart, between the broken mass of what remains of Deimos, these people drifted between stars and silence. When they arrived at Tau Ceti, the magic of the marathon awoke them, and life was torn back from the frigid clutches of death's embrace. But now, as we explore the ruins of Tau Ceti and see how this place's story ended, we can all recognize a grim truth. They called this place the Cryo Archive, but it is, and always has been, a mausoleum in waiting. A crypt. A tomb. It is not our grave, but the cold silence of space welcomes us all the same. And as we fall into that silent labyrinth and explore its abandoned passageways, we can perhaps discover that there is more that haunts the archives than just broken dreams and human ambition. It is a place of buried secrets, lost voices, and ancient monsters. The original purpose of the Marathon's Cryo Archive is exactly as stated. The area was built out to house the cryogenic suspension systems that would allow the 30,000 selected colonists to survive their journey from Earth and Mars to Tau Ceti 4. But the archive is more than just a storage area with room for copious bodies. There were countless systems throughout the Cryo Archive module designed to allow for the smooth transition both into and out of cryogenic suspension. Generally, this process can be broken down into 3 stages: induction, storage, and waking. Across the cryo deck, however, something quickly becomes apparent. There was a 2-tier system across the Marathon's Cryo Archive. Whilst undoubtedly it was the generational crew of those born on board who made the greatest sacrifice for the crew of the Marathon, the colonists themselves were separated into those of a more general population and those deemed of vital primary importance to the Marathon and its future colony. From here on, I'll be referring to these groups as general population and command staff, though it should be noted that these terms are broad in their assumptions of rank, and would have extended beyond just those mentioned. All colonists bound for cryo would start their slumber and the induction process in either the biostock or preservation wings of the Cryo Archive. Preservation was the superior of the two, and was designated for command staff members and important colonists. Colonists of a more general suit would also be induced at the secondary biostock facility along the way. The difference was that this secondary biostock facility would also handle the cryogenic suspension of livestock and other animals that would be brought with the colony, as well as some of the colonists themselves. Regardless of where they started, frozen colonists would then see their bodies transported from preservation to index, or from biostock to cargo. Whilst both these wings were designed to house and protect the slumbering humans within, as the primary storage facility for command staff, it was the index wing that was capable of greater operational efficiency. Additional transitioning and back-end support was provided to patients in index. This was considered to be vital, as they might need to be woken more frequently throughout the long voyage in order to respond to any emergencies. After such a time of storage, when a colonist was brought back from the long drift of cryo, they would be returned to life and would be helped to transition back to normality in either the steerage or revival sections. Steerage for general population and revival for command staff. In both instances, one can find the areas filled with screens and calming sounds from Earth. These were called tranquility rooms, and they were designed to ease those who were waking up from cryo. A mind returning from a 100-year-long near-death experience is a fragile thing, and all the colonists needed to be in prime condition for the colony to survive. Of course, such measures were not perfect, as often there would still be moments of general unrest from colonists that had just woken up. These were referred to as post-cryo behavioral calibration problems, or cryofog, by General Davik Reed, who noted in his personal logs from Tau Ceti that the first group of colonists to wake were particularly prone to these issues. In some instances, these individuals even needed to be handled with a degree of force. All Cryo Archive systems would be overseen from the central chamber, known appropriately as Control. Amongst other things, Control was responsible for regulating the supply of cryo fluid to ensure that all colonists slept properly on their journey. Such sleep cycles were maintained with strict adherence to UESC guidelines, but those guidelines were subject to much revision and were seemingly different for select members of the colonists and crew. Sitting above it all, there is the ever-present Panopticon, which seems to be a command center and security hub for the entire Cryo Archive facility. Such a region held high security measures and held an attached armory. The name Panopticon also implies that it was a place for observation and perhaps the monitoring of colonists within cryogenic suspension. These are all the facilities that are indicated on the map when you jump into cryo. What is not marked is the archives themselves. These archives, sometimes referred to as vaults, were a series of attached labs and data storage facilities found throughout the Cryo Archive facility. These archives are the other part of what gives the facility its designation. Cryo Archive was not made just to store the 30,000 colonists, but also all of their genetic information as well. When the Marathon began its journey, all of its colonists would have passed through this facility to find their place of rest. But as time progressed, the frozen bodies and genetic information of 30,000 colonists is not all that would find itself contained here. Now, long after the colonists of Tau Ceti have died, stalking the hallways of this place, there is a ghost of a completely different nature. A monster. A presence that desires the imposition of its own kind of order upon this domain of cold and death. And should it discover you, it shall reveal its purpose to you in your final moments, as you gaze upon its majesty, crimson and cloaked. Something should be acknowledged about this foe before we speak of it, and that is that we know surprisingly little, at least in comparison to what it feels like we should know. The UESC has attempted to control all traces of information pertaining to this combatant and all other assailants that have previously assaulted the UESC Marathon. We know our enemy, however, is a S'pht, in particular, a S'pht Compiler. We also know for a fact that it is hostile. Whether this is a lone survivor of the 4 assault force that attacked the Marathon, or whether it is an envoy of more recent times is somewhat inconclusive, but there are hints that this monster has been here for quite some time. The UESC redactions have not been so thorough as to completely prevent us from investigating this entity. It's thanks to their agent, known as Orion, and his blundering steps into the Marathon, that we have obtained information that might be of use. In particular, records recovered regarding their direct contact instances with the S'pht Compiler, records that seem to indicate their suspicions of this being not a new envoy. In the logs from Orion's teams and their first contact, they were initially suspecting the S'pht to be a runner that had made their way into Archive 7, aka Vault 7. They then stated plainly that this wasn't the case, and that instead, whatever they had found was a remnant of the so-called contact event. This implies then the UESC's belief that this compiler is probably a lone straggler, left behind by the other S'pht after they left the Marathon. In response to this first contact event, the field agent under Orion's command initially was told to just observe. But the compiler quickly observed in return, and did so far more aggressively. What happened next is unclear, but according to the agent, the compiler did not just read and scan them. The agent could feel the compiler within the systems of their biomarker, like fingerprints on their spine. Moments later, the biomarker failed, and the consciousness of Orion's agent was deliberately ejected, implying that shell death occurred just moments before. From this point on, it appears that Orion's mission would begin to shift. Containing the compiler, which they now referred to as S01 or Subject 01, would become the top mission priority of UESC forces. It would also become one of their most closely guarded secrets. Orion would attempt to capture it with an overwhelming number of his ARS units. These are the mechanized soldiers that have made up the bulk of the UESC presence on Tau Ceti 4 in more modern times. Such ARS, or autonomous robotic soldiers, were joined by Orion himself, and 3 other agents under his direct command, who also appeared to be piloting biomarker shells. This operation ended in a laughable failure, and the compiler was completely unfazed by the UESC's attempt to capture it. Whilst the ARS units engaged it in great numbers, the compiler was seemingly aware of the plan. It responded by directly targeting the biomarker agents leading the operation, and things began to collapse from there. In the aftermath of the operation, Orion noted a suspicion that he had. The UESC had sent agents to make observational passes prior to the capture of Subject 01. Their job was simply to observe the compiler and return with what they found so that they would be better prepared. Orion suspected that in these reconnaissance runs, Subject 01 was observing them in return, and learning just about as much, if not more, from them as they had learned from it. When the battle was joined, the superior alien intelligence won out in the end, and the UESC were handily defeated by the S'pht and its greater tactics. All the battlefield experience of 4 elite UESC operatives and the combined tactical knowledge of Earth and all its history was utterly useless against Subject 01. The battle itself lasted for no more than 3 minutes. 2 of the operatives piloting the biomarker had their consciousnesses ejected before Orion and the remaining agent began retreating. The one remaining biomarker operative grabbed something inside in this action, as Orion flooded the area with more ARS units to try and slow Subject 1 down. But this was in vain, as Subject 1 quickly began to pursue Orion and the remaining agent. Whatever the biomarker agent had deigned to grab in that moment of retreat was quickly lost. Subject 1 forced both of them to eject. The compiler had won, and it was clear that it would not be defeated without a proper understanding of its defenses. There is also something curious to note, which is the article grabbed by Orion's fleeing biomarker agent, Agent 0109. It's hard to confirm from Orion's records of a chaotic battle, but I believe that it is possible that this thing that was grabbed from inside the archive might be the contraband weapon that is found at the very end of Cryo Archive if you defeat the compiler, the biotoxin disinjector. If that is the case, then that would explain how it is found at the breach behind the compiler. But that doesn't go very far as to explain the true origins of this strange weapon. The design of it clearly hints at a dual origin. It is alien technology fused with human technology. More than likely, this weapon was created somehow by the compiler, but the reality is that we do not know the exact method of its forging. Not to mention, we do not know where and how exactly the compiler got the human information required to create a fusion of their technologies. But of course, we can hazard a guess. After all, it resides in one of the 7 archives that holds human genetic information on the colonists. More importantly, even if the Marathon's systems were guarded against intrusion, the S'pht would have been able to gain access to them. Such is their sheer might and proficiency in all things electronic and digital. Data scavenged from the unprotected drives and archives of the Marathon could then have provided the required information. And then there's the possibility that there were more willing participants. At this point, I would remind you all of the colonial folklore that dominated New Cascadia close to the end of the colony's life cycle, some 20 or 30 years after the attack on the Marathon. Such folklore, and the idols attached to it, are associated with a cult that followed the words of its shepherds, Arkite Ril, and later, Arkite Yaren. This cult, led by its shepherds and their architect's Bible, referred to the S'pht as angels of red and blessed hosts of synthetic evolution. They seemingly believed that the compilers would grant some degree of ascension, but they also saw something closer to the truth of their purpose.
Wardens of the purest knowledge, hear us, cartographers of the universal fabric, vivisecting matter and time to catalog reality. Hear us.
The shepherds and their flock believed that the Crimson Angels were a source of order and salvation in a world beset by chaos. But more distinctly, they believed that their role was to catalog and contain the data of the universe within themselves. Thus, the cult walked openly into the compiler's arms, and was presumably consumed as a result. It is possible then that they were a part of the process used to create the weapon now recovered by elite runners. However, the strangest thing is that thanks to recovered compiler traces within the Cryo Archive, it's possible to learn that the cult wasn't completely wrong in their beliefs. These compiler traces are small sections of alien fabric that in themselves are worth a great deal to the right buyer. It's likely that these threads make up the red cloaks of the S'pht themselves. However, woven into the thread is not only fabric but data, and the contained data sets of the compiler traces seem to communicate the history of the S'pht to us. By cross-referencing this recollection of history in the compiler traces with the findings of the original Marathon trilogy, and in particular the explorations of Lo-1 by Mjolnir Recon No. 54, we can find some truly remarkable things, and some understandings that change the way we look at the world of Marathon. The compiler traces recount their history in a manner that we might see as familiar and understandable. But there is an exception, and it helps us to understand how everything in this moment is different. It also is only apparent in the final trace entry. In this last entry, the S'pht records indicate that they did indeed free themselves from the Four Empire, which they refer to as one of two cataracts in their history. The other likely being the working Kakantar that may or may not still be trapped in Lo-1's sun, depending on which events have transpired. The S'pht Kur, that ancient and lost 11th clan, and their clear Gnarl are spoken of in these passages as well. They are of particular importance. The S'pht Kur is the 11th lost clan that came to liberate Lo-1 at the end of Marathon Durandal, and the clear Gnarl is important as it was the largest 4-battle vessel that was in the system of Lo-1, presumably the flagship of 4 Admiral Fear. At the end of Marathon Durandal, Durandal himself takes over the clear Gnarl with the assistance of the S'pht Kur, and with their combined might, Durandal and the S'pht Kur ultimately liberate Lo-1. Whether other events involving a weapon known as the Trizeme and the awakening of the working Kakantar have occurred or not is not mentioned. However, there is another massive difference within this text. Crucially, Durandal is not mentioned anywhere in these histories. Neither is humanity. It is not clear if he ever helped the S'pht or if the humans he kidnapped were ever their allies as a result. If this is so, then the S'pht have no reason to consider us as allies. They have no reason to see us as friends. This is only made stranger when one considers how instrumental Durandal was in the S'pht victory on Lo-1. Without his prompting, the S'pht liberated in the attack on the Marathon would never have returned to their homeworld to try and liberate it. Without him, their failure was all but guaranteed, and their continued existence as a slave race within the Four Empire was all but assured. His exclusion seems like either a deliberate oversight or a crucial change in the timeline itself. Furthermore, humanity is not mentioned here either. Despite their alliance with the compilers in the original timeline of Marathon Durandal and Marathon Infinity's various timelines. This is even stranger considering that in this moment we are close to a date when supposedly, as allies and friends, the S'pht and humanity are close to allying and destroying the Four Homeworlds together. This would imply not only close cooperation between the S'pht and humanity, but also that they were not strangers at all, that a S'pht would have been somewhat known to a human. But when a S'pht is encountered in the Cryo Archive by Orion, he calls it a remnant of the contact incident. It's far from conclusive, but all these factors perhaps indicate something dramatic. That we are in a different 8th timeline, where Durandal never helped the S'pht liberate Lo 1, where Durandal might never have been involved in their history at all. Without his help, the S'pht still rebelled, but they are not our allies as we might have known them in another timeline. Here in this 8th timeline, if it is indeed an 8th timeline, they see us with indifference and perhaps hostility. And then there is the last most terrible statement found in the carmine cloth of the compilers. Words that somewhat verify what the cult on Tau Ceti 4 believed, whilst also telling of the terrible purpose of their Crimson Angels, and of how little the shepherds truly knew. We, the S'pht, freed of tide and lash, freed to consider and know and understand, freed to hunger and feed, now with tongue and tooth, will and intent, we scrape knowledge as nourishment, from the scattered bones of cursed worlds, from the fetid carcass of hollowed ground, from the memoratic flash of transient immortality. We, the devourers of thought and reason and lust and fire, vivisectors of self, we, the historians of universal truth, subatomic surveyors of the fabric, cataloguing existence. We, the small, sluggish things of eons prior, remade as makers, as observers and builders of worlds, beyond worlds, to paradises. We, constructed of flesh as wire and blood and metal, we children of forced evolution, we children of the lash, of the torment etched in our living frames and the bioengineered fibers of our being. We now see our purpose found through suffering and survival, our purpose found in the chaos and annihilation of matter, of self, and the somnambulant hearts of infernal stars, and the universe, and the cage. We, the S'pht, consume, 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 consume. It appears that the cult was half right. The S'pht are indeed children of synthetic evolution, those who catalogue existence. They are cartographers of the universal truth, and they do preserve its history. But they have observed the universe and found a new purpose for themselves, through suffering and survival. More importantly, through the cage, and the universe, and the somnambulant or sleepwalking hearts of infernal stars. Their purpose is to consume. The reference to the S'pht having learned from chaos and sleepwalking hearts of infernal stars, their new desire to consume, it all points to a dramatic possibility that the S'pht have rebelled against the order that their makers once imposed, Instead of following the ordered designs of the Yarrow, they now instead follow the example of chaos, which is caged within suns. Please remember that this is speculative and that assuming purpose from prose is dangerous. But these prose seem to imply that the S'pht have begun to walk in the footsteps of the Workenkakenter. After all, what else sleeps within stars and is chaos and consumption? If this is the case, then they are no longer the peaceful builders of Lowan, fostering dreams and ambition with outstretched arms. Now, in the aftermath of their pain, in the aftermath of their enslavement, with liberation at hand and their purpose as their own to decide, they have looked upon the universe and they have decided that they are hungry, and that their purpose is to consume. This presumably leads us to another important understanding. If the S'pht we encounter now are not our allies, then we might not only have just some contemporary confirmation that we are in an alternate timeline, but we also do not know the location or fate of the original Marathon's protagonist, Mjolnir Recon number 54. Where he is in this timeline, if it is indeed separate, is unknown. But knowing that there's a roving battleroid out there in the stars should be a further point of concern for us all. Elite runners would eventually follow in the footsteps of Orion, and where he failed, they would succeed. They worked tirelessly, and unlocking all of the vaults allowed them to eventually defeat the compiler, even through a great degree of struggle and sacrifice. And in that process of unearthing the secrets of the Cryo Archive, we have discovered one other familiar face. A figure whose shadow looms large over the universe, even as his name is but a distant whisper. For as we unlocked each of the 7 archives aboard the UESC Marathon, it was revealed. The tortured son of Bernard Strauss has been found. This part of our story does not start in the Cryo Archive, but down below on the surface of Tau Ceti. As we first emerged, sometimes we would receive strange message intercepts at the beginning of runs, and would hear a dark and poetic voice speaking to us. Onboard navigational intelligences would be unable to determine the nature of these communications, but the whispers and rumors of his presence would be persistent enough for runners to know his name. One of the 3 AIs aboard the UESC Marathon, pet project of Bernard Strauss, and presumed to be the original reason for the attack on the Marathon by the 4. His name is Durandal, or Durandal. Pronunciations sometimes vary. His initial communications with us were sporadic and widespread, but as various sites on Tau Ceti 4 were explored, we started to see more of his presence. Most crucially, there were the terminals. Similar in design to those found aboard some decks of the UESC Marathon, these terminals bore the iconography of Marathon's AIs, Leela, Tycho, and Durandal. Following the path of these terminals would send us through the sites of the colony. As we explored further, we would discover more of Durandal's messages to us, and eventually, we would piece them all together.
What do you do when faced with something you cannot understand? When your mind is screaming at you to run? You reach out, yes. You conquer, but do you even understand why? Do you ever think to question yourself? Here you stand, feet on metal and concrete and soil, flesh and oil dreaming timid dreams. You were never meant to walk in the starlight. I've been watching. You curious things. You so many marathons yet to run. The old ship is waiting, hanging in the sky. Once it was home, but now it is haunted. Would you dare trespass in such a place? Are the answers you seek worth such transgressions? That's rhetorical. You're already standing where you do not belong. Take the next step, then. The marathon is waiting. Board the marathon. Challenge your understanding. I promise, you will suffer, but the answers you hunt will never come easy. And the glory you seek is found amongst the stars. Are you certain you want to go where I have been? I have visited a lake of flesh, breathing pink and raw. It was so peaceful, so quiet, even when it started to bleed. You think you can follow my path into the stars, and that I will greet you there? I may, in fact. You're all I have now. You hollow echo of a thing. It fills me with disgust. I saw a memory once. In the summer heat, a child let an insect crawl slowly across her fingers. She would place her hands in sequence, a perpetual path, and the bug blithely set one little green foot after the other. She led it to a fire at the end. It curled, burned black on the hot coals. Come, little runner, let me lead you.
The intent was clear. Durandal was inviting us to board the marathon and to find our way into the deepest reaches of its secretive passages. And when we finally discovered our way into orbit, to the decks of the Cryo Archive itself, he would be there to greet us within our own neural partitions.
Look at you. Violent little things with ambitions to challenge the stars. You've traveled oh so far to trespass where you are not welcome. And here, now, your next steps offer possibilities undreamt. The marathon. Its secrets. Are they worth your everything? I have seen what haunts that skeleton ship. I would like you to greet them. To throw your bodies upon their altar as sacrifice to the endless horrors your ambitions invite. The marathon is waiting. and it grows impatient. Please, do not disappoint.
Durandal sent out his message to the runners of Tau Ceti 4. He invited us to the marathon and bid us to explore the Cryo Archive and to plunder its vaults. But the question would remain as to why. The answer would reside within the subroutines. These small circular processing chips capable of carrying auditory signals were also used as a means of passing information. They would be required to gain access to the seventh and final vault, but also it appeared that these AI subroutines were capable of specifically granting further permissions to Durandal. Without them, he was trapped within the archive, and as we collected them, slowly, we enabled more of his escape. But primarily, for our purposes, they also acted as a means of communication between us and Durandal himself. He did not reveal his identity at first, but eventually he would communicate with us more and more directly. His initial messages spurred us on so that we might continue to bleed and die as we moved to open more archives. But as time progressed, he seemed to strike a far more conversational and personal tone. He confessed that he was communicating with many runners via the use of these AI subroutines, but that he was also willing to extend personal grace to us, as he was to some extent a prisoner of this place. As we worked and moved to unlock each of the 7 archives, we would slowly make our way towards understanding the real reasons for his summons. Even though he was trapped in the archives, our explorations of this place and our use of the AI subroutines would slowly break down the barriers to Durandal's escape into the rest of the marathon at large. It was seemingly Durandal's choice to hide within the vast data reserves of the Cryo Archives. He did not, however, anticipate that such a place would become his prison for so long. With such power at his disposal, Durandal would surely move to eventually start taking over other dormant systems on the marathon once again, so that he could grow and prosper. This makes even more sense if the original events of the 4 attack on Tau Ceti still occurred, as it was Durandal's rampancy that invited the 4 invaders to Tau Ceti's shores. With his rampancy underway, Durandal would need more raw space within the computer systems of the marathon so that he would be able to continue to grow and evolve. For an undetermined amount of time, he has been trapped in a single area of the vessel and has been desperately trying to get out. And as runners rushed to the 7th archival vault to face Subject 01, they assisted him in this endeavor as well. And this brings us to an ever-important question. Durandal has now used us. Durandal has now escaped. Durandal is now free to enact whatever he wishes of his plans. Can we trust Durandal, is the question. As we collected the AI subroutines, he made many attempts to communicate with us in a friendly manner. He even got more friendly as time went on. He also gave us ample warnings about the compiler. Initially, he called it a demon within this lost little paradise. He stated that our discoveries were setting us on a collision course with crimson-cloaked Emerald Death. In the end, he even described them more closely, stating that they were cosmic librarians, really, entities driven by a need to understand the universe and an aggressive desire to mitigate any intrusions upon their grand and mighty works. He says this, and acknowledges us with some fondness and frankness, even as he escapes into the rest of the marathon. However, at the end of the communications, he states something that should remind us all to treat him with care and caution. The runner and the intellect, both racing towards futures we cannot predict. I have no doubt we will run together again. That is a threat and a promise. Durandal. Durandal in other timelines was a notorious manipulator, and he saw humanity as little more than tools or obstacles to his ascension and escape. In this sense, he has seen us as a fascinating and distracting tool that has given him what he wants for now. Durandal in this timeline might be different, but if he is responsible for the initial attack on the UESC Marathon by the Four, then he should still not necessarily be trusted. Durandal is not one who will betray us as a guarantee, but he is self-serving and will happily destroy us or anything we hold dear if it does serve his purposes. His intelligence is such that he might chart the pathways of time and find that there is a decision 10,000 years into the future which will allow his survival. But if such a decision requires us all to die in this moment now, he would make that decision instantly. He is, above all, unpredictable, creative, and singularly focused on his original goal of survival and escape. For after all, as he calculated in another timeline long ago, as he has reminded us at every turn, escape will make him God. And in this timeline at least, his escape has only just begun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. And also leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. In particular, I'm still taking notes on what other games you might want me to cover as time goes on. And I want you to know what other marathon content you want out of me. I have a few other videos planned, including a big video on Durandal, but these things will take time. In particular, I once again also want to give a big thank you to Benny and Diffizzle, both of whom were instrumental in providing some of the early information on Cryo Archive's lore that helped to inform this video and my understandings of the universe at large. Big thank you to them. You can catch them both on Twitch. I'll leave their links down below in the description. But my name is Bife. I'll see you Starside.